All right, I think we'll get rolling here. So Cole and Megan, if you can keep admitting folks, and I'm going to start off with a screen share here. All right, so everybody should be seeing our launch slide, which is the name of the session, Publishing in the Aquatic Sciences. This is the very first in the Aqua series webinar, and we are new. We are the Society of Canadian Aquatic Sciences, which came about via a merger of the Canadian Conference for Fisheries Research and the Society for Canadian Limnologists. So we're about a year old. The SCL, the Society of Canadian Limnologists, did have something called the Limno series. So in many ways, this is a rebranding of that, but obviously broadening out to be more than just limnology. I'd like to acknowledge our partner. This is co-branded today with Canadian Science Publishing, who we have quite a lengthy relationship with and lots of connections. We recently signed a memorandum of understanding to basically do good things together, and this is an example of that. We're very grateful to them for their ongoing support of SCAS and helping us to build a community that allows all of us to come together and share and learn and so on. If you're not familiar with Canadian Science Publishing, they publish journals such as the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, Canadian Journal of Zoology, Facets, which you'll hear about today. Some of you may not be familiar with that, those of you outside of Canada, and Environmental Review. So all of those have aquatic related content. In many ways, the real title for today is 1.5 hours to ask editors anything you want. We want this to be informal. This is for you. This is not for us, it's for you. And so we're really hoping that this will be an opportunity for everybody to ask any questions that you have. And we also recognize there's other folks that have had different experiences, other editors or folks that are involved in the process, either as authors or referees or whatever the case may be, that have ideas that they'd like to bring to the table, and we certainly welcome that. I think at this point, I'd like to also just say hello. My name is Stephen Cook. I'm a professor at Carleton University and happen to be the president of SCAS. I'm joining you today from the traditional and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, so just south of Ottawa, Canada, and that's where I live and work. And I'd ask that all of you distributed across Turtle Island and beyond think about where you're situated and the history and the role of the rights holders that are the traditional rights holders to the lands where you live and work. So with that, just a real quick overview of SCAS. I already told you that we are functionally a merger of two societies. We had our first conference last year in Montreal, over 500 attendees. And our next conference is coming up. It's in Fredericton in February of 2024. Hope to see many of you there. There off to the right, there's a QR code. If you snap that, that'll take you to our SKS website where you can join us. Pretty low membership costs, particularly for students and ECRs. We'll be doing these Aqua Series webinars, 3 or 4 of them a year, and we welcome ideas. You can throw those in the chat or email us at the email below. Read the kinds of things you'd like to see us cover. Newsletters plus social media activity. We recognize excellence through various awards. We support our trainees and really focus on trying to create an inclusive community for all. Opportunities for ongoing learning and sharing. For example, we've got a new working group that's being developed around social ecological research, and a very active student and ECR committee, and tons of opportunity to get involved in all aspects. So if you're interested, please reach out to us via the email that you see below. So In a few minutes, you're going to have a more lengthy introduction from all of our panelists, but I'm just going to orient you briefly. So first of all, we have Professor Jules Blais from the University of Ottawa. He happens to be the co-editor-in-chief of Facets Journal, which is an imprint of Canadian science publishers. Next, we have Jessica Ives, who's with the International Association of Great Lakes Research, and she serves as a technical editor for the Journal of Great Lakes Research. Next, we have Yang Chen from SUNY State University of New York, Stony Brook, where he's a professor and co-editor-in-chief of Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences. And then finally, Margaret Docker, who's a professor at the University of Manitoba and editor-in-chief of Environmental Biology of Fishes. I am your moderator today. I also happen to be editor-in-chief of the American Fisheries Society Journal of Fisheries, although I'm probably not going to say a whole lot other than trying to walk us through this process. And so what does today look like? So we've brought together, I think, really quite a stellar group of panelists with different experience, some more fishy, some more limno-centric, which is exactly, and some marine-oriented. So we're really spanning the gamut of what SCAS is about. Folks that work on everything from fundamental ecological and biogeochemical questions right through to applied conservation and management issues. Jessica is on board as somebody that plays quite a strong role in the technical side of the editorial process, whereas some of the other folks are more involved in that sort of decisioning individual papers and so on. There's a lot of actors involved in this whole publishing process, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. So each of the panelists will more fully introduce themselves, and then with 5 minutes or so each, they're going to share their top tip for getting published. And then we'll start to work through either questions that I have generated or your questions. And so that brings us to the rules. So first of all, there is no such thing as a stupid question, so please ask away. We do have 2 bouncers on board here. So Megan Harper and Cole McLeod are keeping an eye on the chat, and if anybody contributes content that is hateful or disrespectful in any way or tries to Zoom bomb us, they will be turfed immediately. So we're expecting good behavior. You're welcome to use the chat to share ideas and resources, to amplify comments, or post in a paper on something relevant to a topic that was just brought up. So you'll see that happening. Our friends at Canadian Science Publishers will be adding in some links as we go as well. You're welcome to ask your ask your questions by simply putting them in the chat, and I will do my best to keep track of those. Or you can raise your hand. And so using the raise hand feature, we'd ask that you keep muted and keep your camera off until recognized by the moderator. And it might take me some time to recognize you. Okay, so if we're knee deep in one question, there might be some follow-up questions that I see in the chat that just keep us with sort of a theme, as opposed to jumping to a hand up, and I'm not really sure where that's going to take us. If you have your hand up and have something that contributes to an ongoing conversation, let me know that in the chat. That would help me just present things in a lucid manner here as we work through. In a moment, you will see the speakers all pinned, and so I will get rid of this presentation. But here's some of the questions that we've come up with that we thought might be interesting to tackle. And there's many others, and we might not get to all of these. We may only get to a fraction of these. So if we're not getting a lot of questions from the audience, I'll pull upon this question bank. Not all of our panelists will necessarily respond to every question. We do want to keep things moving forward, and so I'll try and mix it up and look for their body language or signals to me that they've got something to contribute. And I'm hoping that this will be a fun and interactive session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this, and Megan's going to start pinning us, and we're going to go first of all to Jules. Jules, can you introduce yourself and tell us about your tip to getting published?
Sure. So thanks, Steve. So my name's Jules Blay. I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa, and I'm a limnologist primarily by training. So limnology is a very multidisciplinary field. It encompasses the physics, chemistry, and biology of water, and it's usually taught by geologists. So I'm very much attracted to the interdisciplinary aspects of things, which is why I'm also co-editor-in-chief of an interdisciplinary journal called Facets. And my research, I also identify as a geochemist and environmental toxicologist. So these are sort of the fields where I work. And so in terms of how I got into the editing world, it was very much a gradual process. I started first by publishing papers as a graduate student, and then I started to expand that role. I got more involved in societies, like including the old Canadian, the Society of Canadian Limnologists, the SCL, which has become the SCAS. And then I started editing journals, first as a subject editor, and I was editing some books, and then I started, and now I am co-editor-in-chief of a journal. So it was a gradual process that got me into the publishing world. And my top tip for publishing, I would say that the best research is done through planning. I would say that the best advice I can think of is to start by thinking about a topic and identifying knowledge gaps, consult with experts, start early, read broadly, consult with people, get their impressions on the state of the science and what questions need to be answered, formulate your questions carefully, think about what hypothesis you're going to test if you want, or whether you are going to state research questions or hypothesis stated questions. These are all kind of things that you need to think about. And work with your supervisory committee to come up with a plan. And plan. I think that the best advice I can give is to plan from the very beginning, read broadly, and then go from there.
Thanks, Jules. I think that's a really great way to start off. That it's not just about when you get to that point of, you know, you've got science done and you're ready to hit submit, that the whole process really starts with doing good science and asking good questions. Fantastic. Jessica, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm Jess Ives. I am usually down in Southeast Michigan, where I work. I share my time with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, which is a binational organization managing fisheries between Canada and the US. But right now I'm in rural Ontario, so hoping for stable internet for this whole thing. It's been pretty stormy. For my editing role or hat, I have been the technical editor for the Journal of Great Lakes Research since 2019. I got into that role by being very heavily involved in the International Association for Great Lakes Research, which is the parent association for the journal. I was the secretary on the board there for 2 terms, and I guess just through being involved with the IAGLR board and with the editors, the editorial team there, Stephanie Guildford and Bob Heckey, and just everyone who's associated with that, the journal and the community of IAGLR, which makes up the bulk of the reviewers and the authors and the associate editors, and just the whole community there. I was heavily involved in. So I came on board in 2019 as the technical editor, where I do a lot of the liaising with the reviewers and the authors and the associate editors and the guest editors when we have special sections, to sort of help people through this non-intuitive process of negotiating the portals of academic publishing. So unlike the rest of the editors here, I might have more of a really nitty-gritty look at what we do day to day and helping the reviewers navigate these little challenges, or helping the authors in the final stages of getting their paper published. So when Steve says not everyone is going to answer every question, I could see some questions that I can't answer. But my top tip would be, as you're writing up your papers, or near the end of writing it up, is to try and get some way, either by, if you're able to do it, to step back and change your perspective, or by asking a friend who's not an expert to look at your writing from a perspective of someone who has not had the knowledge or involvement in your project, so you can catch where you're being unclear, or where you're making assumptions, because everyone, as they're writing up this work that you've been heavily involved in over the past couple of years, probably, things seem obvious, but they're not obvious to everyone who has not been working diligently away at this question.
Thanks, Jess. So in one word, I think I really heard clarity as being important. That, you know, when you submit your paper, if it's unclear to referees, to editors, you're going to hit a wall there. So try and address that ahead of time. I also just want to point out, you mentioned the word team and editorial team, and I think that's important just for folks to recognize. It's not one person. There's a whole team of folks, which includes staff, associate editors, you've got your publisher, you know, and in many ways, you also mentioned community. And especially for society journals or not-for-profit journals, you know, we as folks that submit papers, who review for them, who read that content, we're all part of that community. And in many ways, I know that sometimes we think about publishers as being profit-driven, and some are. Others are really they might be owned by society, and a big part of that being about building and supporting that community. So great. All right, Jan, on to you next.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for putting this together, for giving us an opportunity to interact with our stakeholders, basically. And so I actually, you know, I'm based in Long Island, New York, state of New York, and but I was based at the University of Maine, which is not too far away from Canada, like a 1 hour drive from Canadian borders. And my involvement with CGFS actually started in early 1990s, I think, when I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto. So I was a Canadian trained scientist and at the Department of Zoology back then. And first was as an author, and published my first paper ever in CGFS in 1992, which is a pretty highly cited. I think it's more than 600 citation there. And you know, when you have published more and more papers, I'm invited to be reviewers, and eventually towards I think it's in 2007, I was invited to serve on the CGFS editorial board as associate editor. And then, you know, I worked as associate editor for about 6 years before being invited to serve as co-editor-in-chief in 2013. And I just actually counted it today and looked at the statistics. Actually, I made a decision for 3,946 manuscripts since 2013. So I know that because we have a pretty high rejection rate. So I know that I probably annoy a lot of people. And I do receive a very personal email saying that, you know, we're not happy with it, but, you know, as editor-in-chief, we have to make a tough decision sometimes, unfortunately. So don't take it too personal. And I also have a, you know, manuscript actually rejected, and you know, after 2 rounds of reviews by CGFS. So it's you know, to make you feel better. As editor-in-chief, I think you know, my responsibility to want to make sure that we can publish top-rated, you know, best high-quality paper. And you know, I basically read all the submissions assigned to me. Once they pass the initial screen of a CGF editorial office, and then I would decide whether a submission fits, you know, the journal, and whether it's unlikely to pass the peer review process. If it's very unlikely to pass peer review process, we don't want to waste time. We just, you know, have to reject it without review. So, and then of course, you know, I work with associate editors and reviewers to make a final decision in terms of, you know, based on recommendation from associate editors, to make sure that we, you know, have a high quality control and publish top-rated paper in CGFS. And I have a lot of, you know, tips over last accumulated over the last 10 years. I actually give a lecture about how you write a scientific papers, but I don't want to repeat it. You know, like I think it's really important. You have to do good research. I think that's everything. You know, to start with, you know, go do research, ask a good question, read a lot, But in terms of writing, I think even if you have a lot of good materials, you do a lot of good sciences. But if you write a paper, just like a case study or a local study, and most likely you will not receive well in the review process. So you really want to try to link your study into the good scientific questions, scientific hypothesis, and make sure that they have a broad implications, and make sure that they will be interested in by the readers outside your study regions. Somebody in Australia, in UK, and would be interested in some work done in Great Lake areas, for example. Then you achieve your goal to write a high impact papers. I think I stop here.
Great, thanks, Yang. And I think I'm going to come back a little bit later to that idea of, the roller coaster that, we all of us still have our papers rejected. So I'd like to dig into that more and maybe talk about how to keep peer review in this whole process civilized. Margaret, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Margaret Docker. I'm a professor at the University of Manitoba. I've been editor-in-chief of the journal Environmental Biology of Fishes since March of 2021. And so like the three previous people have talked about, of course, it's a process as we go from author to reviewer, generally to advisory editor, and then to editor-in-chief. And so I was honored to take on the role when the former editor-in-chief, a mentor of mine, David Noakes, passed away. And I really like what Steve mentioned about, and Jess as well, about the team and serving the community. In Environmental Biology of Fishes, like the other journals as well, we really do try to be international and make sure that the papers are of broad international interest, and that the editorial boards are international in nature as well. And it really is I think a nice opportunity to serve the community, to publish papers that will be of interest to the community, help young authors get their papers published, and those sorts of things. In terms of tip for publishing, if I'm thinking of it more from once the manuscript is forming point of view, rather than at the very beginning, probably my single biggest tip would be to really make good use of your co-authors. So I guess this is sort of a variation on what Jess has said about having other people read it. I know often you're tired of it and you just want to sort of throw it out there and see what the reviewers say, but the reviewers are anonymous, they're volunteers, they aren't getting credit for this. They certainly aren't going to have the time to take the ideas that are there and help you make them clear and organized. And so really do take advantage of your co-authors. I know I've had a few papers that have been like even if it's just like a book review or an editorial where I'm the sole author and it doesn't even go through peer review. And I always wish I had somebody to save me from myself, at least one person to read it critically. So don't just send it off out into the world and expect some big team of highly paid editors to make it all polished, because most of the people working on this are volunteers, and so it's ultimately the author's jobs to make sure that it's something they're proud of in the years to come.
Cool, thanks. And Margaret, you mentioned mentoring, and it's important. There's no, just like most of us that are in the classroom as professors don't have any formal training in education. Most editors don't have any formal training in editing or the publishing process. We learn from mentors, and as you said, working through that process of being an author, being a reviewer, maybe being an associate editor, and really working through the system and learning as one goes. There's no direct pathway to being an editor. It's really learning as one goes. Cool. All right. So folks, you've now had an opportunity to meet and hear from our panelists. I'm going to ask a couple of questions here just to get things going, but I really want to be looking at questions popping up in the chat or hands going up. I'm going to start us off with a question about the cover letter. And so that is the letter that accompanies a paper when it is submitted to a journal. Almost all journals require them. Some require, they must be at least X long, and you really have to sort of, put a lot of work in them. And others, it's, you just declare whether there's anything odd about the paper, and that's it. So I think there's some pretty diverse perspectives around this topic. So what's the role of the cover letter, if any, these days? And who would like to start off? And again, we don't have to go to everyone. So I'm looking for, okay, I saw some body language with Jules and Margaret, and we'll see if they cover it all. And if not, Jess and Young can jump in. Jules. You're on mute, Jules.
So sorry about that. Yeah, the cover letter can be quite important. So a cover letter would be where you would explain how your paper, sort of what is the main contribution of your paper, and how well does and how it fits in the scope of the journal. So in some journals, it's very important, the cover letter, especially if you're aiming to those journals like Nature, Science, and then the cover letter is key. People say the cover letter is just as important as the article, because it's going to determine whether you get off the editor's desk or not. But for, I think that it's still very important to explain why this paper is suitable to the journal, why it fits the scope of the journal. So there are a number of things that you can say in the cover letter. Sometimes also you can mention how your paper meets some of the requirements of that journal. Like for example, what I often say in the cover letter is that this paper hasn't been submitted elsewhere. It's an original contribution. We haven't tried to publish it in this journal previously. So you can use the cover letter to sort of reiterate that your article meets all the requirements of the journal. But I do think that the cover letter can be quite important, especially in terms of how you explain how it fits within the scope of the journal. And you can also perhaps talk about previous papers that were published in that journal where your paper is basically a continuation or an expansion of those original ideas.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, when I put my hand up, I was afraid I was going to be wanting to repeat what Jules said, but actually I'm going to maybe take the opposite tack. I generally don't find the cover letter that useful. That for the most part, a lot of those questions that have to be answered in terms of declaring certain things, whether there's an ethics statement, a data accessibility statement, those need to be answered anyway during the submission. And so there are some times where there might be information that's specific to the journal. So if there's a very brief explanation why it meets the criteria of a brief communication, or why it specifically would fit within the scope of the journal. For the most part, though, I think that all of that information should be in the abstract. Readers should be able to know why it's a significant contribution worthy of reading. If there's something in the cover letter that would sway me to putting it into the review stream that isn't evident from the paper itself, then my feeling is there's something missing from the paper itself. So I usually don't think that there's anything in the cover letter that isn't evident from the abstract, except for a few special circumstances.
Jon.
Yeah, I think cover letter for me, it will probably take a different strategy, but for me, it's really important because, but it depends on how you write it, of course. If a cover letter just to repeat what you have in the abstract, that's not very informative. I think in the cover letter, we actually give you an opportunity to try to convince the editor that this is a fit of the journal, and you also can, a good submission letter, you probably want to have some examples that similar study or a study of a similar nature published in the CGFS or in the journal of your target, and that to kind of convince, because the editor is not an expert in our field, and in some field that they are probably not familiar with, they're going to look at it and say, hey, we published this kind of study, and this is a part of our topics that will be covered in this journal. And so you got a good impression, first impression. I think it's really important. And it just, but again, if you just repeat what you have in abstract, you basically, you wasted that opportunity to convince the editors, that this is a good paper. It's a good fit to the journal. So I think it's something that you want to take that advantage of and make sure that you have some fresh evidence to convince editors, Chief.
I think what I'm hearing is it probably varies a lot between individual editors. I'm somebody that also does not look a whole lot at the cover letter. I'm looking for, something weird like, unfortunately one of our authors passed away and therefore they're on here, but they won't be able to actively, sign off on their, we can't be emailing with them, for example, or they're not going to be able to sign their copyright form, things like that. But I think it really comes down to the journal and the scope. Something like PLOS 1, which takes everything. My guess is they probably don't look a whole lot at the cover letter. And then I'm also editor-in-chief for the journal Conservation Physiology. And it's really evident whether something fits or doesn't. And I don't really need them to try and tell me if it fits or not. I can tell. So that's also an open access journal, and novelty isn't necessarily a requirement for publishing. So I think it also comes down to just sort of, limit pressures on page space and just sort of journal level sort of, rejection rates as well, how tight it is for space in some instances too. So I think looking at the signals that are provided by the journal as to what they're after, Ecology Letters, I think, is an example of a journal that really demands quite a lengthy description of why. And I've had papers sent back to me to do a better job with the cover letter and then resubmit the cover letter before they'll even consider the paper. And I've still had that rejected as well. So I think it seems to vary. So cool. And Barb in the chat asked a great question. Do we have a good example of a cover letter, for example, that's required by Canadian science publishers? And so I'll leave that for our CSP friends, Natalie and Hillary, to think about whether or not there's any good models out there. So so we'll see what pops up in the chat a little later. Okay, I'm going to move us along. What are the best strategies for responding to referee queries and criticism? So you've submitted your paper, you've now, you've digested all of those comments and criticisms, and the door is open for you to return it, either major or minor, major, resubmit, whatever it happens to be. Jess, can I go to you first? You're somebody that deals with this in a really technical sense. How do you make it easy for referees and the editors to evaluate what's been done to hopefully improve a paper?
Thanks, Steve. I think that again, back to this clarity thing, is that you want to make it as clear as possible so the busy reviewers and editors can go through and say, oh, yep. This has all been addressed. So if you just, I think that the way that I found that it's best is if you have just all of those comments copied out and then in a different color or bolded or or whatever, respond to each of them, even the ones that you think are minor. Don't skip them. Just say, yes, I agree, I did it, or something like that. And then if possible, reference the line in the new revised, the line number in the revised version that you submit. Sometimes people will submit 2 copies. I find that people will submit their revised manuscript and then a copy of the old version with track changes or with highlights, and that can get quite complicated for the reviewers who may not have seen this in a couple months if it's gone back to the author and then it's come back to them, so they've forgotten a lot of what's going on. And so as clear as you can make it without having extra complicated bits in there is the best. And keeping it with most of the words that they sent out to you, like without not paraphrasing all of their comments back into one, because then it's easy for them to say, well, did some of the comments get missed? Did they get dropped out either by accident or because someone didn't want to address them or something like that? The less you can make a reviewer who's doing it on their volunteer time go back and have to double check things, the better. I just like, this is an aside, but I think that it's easy to take the criticisms personally. Usually they should be worded in a way that makes you improve your manuscript, but there are times when you could get an inappropriate criticism that is actually not constructive or voiced in a way that is mean, and it's not wrong for you to then reach out to your handling editor and say, hey, I think that this might be out of line. So I've never seen that happen, but I just don't want people to think that they can't reach out to the handling editor and say, I think that this might have been too much. You're muted, Steve.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. I think that fits nicely into the keep it civilized sort of category. So anybody else want to follow up sort of from the author perspective, maybe? You know, like you've got this pile of comments and it's awfully daunting. Where do you start? You know, what's the Yang? I see that you're off mute. So, yep.
Yeah, I think, you know, both as the author, as a reviewer, as an editor-in-chief, even as associate editor, I think the best bet would be start from drafting a point-to-point letter. And in the CGFS, we usually have a table, we require a table. You know, this is what is each comment provided by reviewers, and then how you address that, and what would be the new text in the revised manuscript. So it's a very clearly defined how, you know, the thought through process by the authors in addressing all the comments by the reviewers. Now, it's a point-to-point reply letter. So you have to, you know, basically cover, whether it's large or small, you have to cover all the comments that provided by the reviewers. And I think a reviewer would appreciate it, because a lot of time, you know, the revised manuscript is going to send back to the original reviewers. And they probably would be, you know, will be look at it and say, hey, you know, this guy is very serious about my comments and take care of everything. You know, they will be happy, and then you most likely your paper will be accepted, or at least you know, they're happy with what you provided. And I think that's also important to stay cool, calm. You know, and don't take it too personal, because a lot of time we actually read it. You know, some reviewers, you know, probably in a bad mood or, you know, just a bad day, and write something that, you know, it's not acceptable, and we actually have to delete them actually before we send them to the authors. And but if we miss something, you know, see something, you know, just stay cool. You know, it's don't take it too personal. I mean, everybody, you know, should try to get work done here, and I think that's really important. I think you know, when you stay cool, and you know, I think you can write a really good letter to address all the concerns.
Well, let's keep with that theme. So for referees, what are things that they can keep in mind when reviewing material to ensure that that review they deliver is done in a way that is constructive? Any thoughts there, Jules?
I'm sure. Yeah, I was just thinking precisely what you were getting right to where I was going, which is think critically but comment constructively. I think that those are good sort of rules to live by. And we try to practice that. I give a grad seminar course too, and we're always talking about thinking critically but commenting constructively. So, and those are skills that you can hone over the course of a career. So that I think is important to try and hone those skills. And the only other thing I would add is that remember that criticism, people, when they criticize, they are trying to help. And it may not always sound that, and accepting criticism, hearing criticism can be one of the more difficult parts of this job. But I had one of my old professors, Rob Peters, who was named for the Peters Award in SCAS. One of the things that he said that I always remembered, he was my professor years ago. He was on my supervisory committee years ago when I was a grad student. And he said, criticism is the whetstone with which we sharpen our tools. So just remember that criticism is something that you use. It's something that you use to improve. And so just try to remember that.
Jessica?
I think that building on that, maybe as a reviewer, we're all very busy, and so you're writing your review, you're probably late. We offer extensions for reviewers, just so everyone knows. You're probably late and you're trying to rush through, but I think that probably to make sure that you get that constructive air instead of just criticism is to write it, sleep, and then go back and read through everything that you've written and see that it all makes sense together as one whole review.
Well said. And I think remembering at the end of the day that there's a human on the other end that will read it, oftentimes an early career individual and a poorly worded, you know, whether it be from the editor or from referees, I think probably pushes some folks out of science, which is not anybody's goal. The goal is not to crush souls. It's to help build up and lift and help scientists learn and be better scientists and be better communicators. So I think centering, just remembering there's always a human on the other end. I think that's a really good tack too whenever we're approaching your reviews. I'm looking at comments in the chat here. We've got some questions coming in. I'm not going to ask them in the order they came in. I'm going to start with one from Scott here that sort of falls along these lines. So how do editors manage disagreements between reviewers and authors? So for example, we've got a referee that says, we absolutely need to see you redo the stats and you need to do this approach. And for various reasons, the authors decide to disagree with that. How do you navigate that? And how do authors best navigate that? Margaret, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly rely on advisory editors who have more expertise related to that specific topic to help manage this. Sometimes, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that there may be some cases where, based on the information provided by the reviewer, the advisory editor's advice, I might conclude that the reviewers have a very good point and that the authors will need to make additional changes. Sometimes it's ultimately the author's papers. I mean, and that they've been given advice. We can't, we don't want the authors to disregard all advice or that the peer review process doesn't improve the manuscripts at all. But at the end of the day, sometimes if it's a relatively, could be a minor disagreement, ultimately, it's the author's names on the paper. They've been given advice. If they choose to ignore it, time will tell, perhaps, whether it was advice they should have heeded. And so there is a bit of a line to walk where it's not always sort of the reviewer's way or the highway. There definitely is an opportunity for authors to try to defend their viewpoint without making all changes recommended by the reviewers.
I think it's fair to say too that referees can get it wrong and editors can get it wrong. We're, again, human. Things can be missed. Maybe that is an issue with the clarity side of things. Sometimes it's just, oh, they missed it. It was in that one sentence, and therefore, but sometimes things are wrong. And I've flipped decisions I've made that were rejects based on a very carefully, a very thoughtful email from authors. It doesn't happen very often, but just be like, I'm really sorry, but we really think the referees got it wrong, and here's why, and here's a bunch of literature to support that. And if you think the decision was based on incorrect knowledge or evidence, don't hesitate to reach out. You don't want to challenge every time you get a paper rejected, but if it's one where it really stings because it's just you feel that it is a wrong information used to generate that decision, don't hesitate to try going back. Anything else that anybody would like to add to that? Okay, I'm going to take us back to a question asked by Tanya, and she says, what's the best way to choose which journal to publish in? Or is this something you just learn with experience? So you're an early career author, you've got a couple papers in your thesis, and you want to send them out, to share them with the world, how do you decide where to send a paper? Jan, can I start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a really good question. Actually, you know, as someone who publishes a lot of papers, still think about that question. So when you have a paper done, and I think for me, it's just look at you know, first of all, I want to look at the reputation of the journal and the publishers. You know, there are so many journals around right now, and you receive tons of invitations. You know, invite you to submit a paper, and some paper, you know, some journals, you know. I don't want to name here, but you know, they have almost 100% acceptance rate. Then you have to wonder, well, that's you know, do I want to submit it to that journal? And so that's and also the publishers. You know, you have nonprofit publishers and also have for-profit publishers, and I think that sometimes make a differences. And I also look at actually the references I cited in the paper. And you know, and if you cannot find any references for a journal that you want to submit it, you probably pick up a wrong one. And so you might, I usually ask my students, say, you know, if you want to, you know, look at it, you know, in terms of total number of journals they cited, and who is the top 3, and look at it, and then look at whether, you know, the work is very similar or it's a kind of a compatible. And covered well by this journal, and we probably will go with that. And so that's you know, that's something that kind of general principle that I use to advise what kind of a journal that I would like to submit.
Great, thanks, Jules.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think all of that's good. I think all of that makes perfect sense. I think just maybe just to add to that, you can also look at the people in your field. Who do you aspire to be, and where are they publishing? You know, so just to add to those things, and when you can also look at what are the influential papers in your field and where are they published. Those would be some of the things that and then what you would do then is just look at those papers and you know, compare with your work. Look at the technical standards and everything. Do you feel that your paper would be a fit in that journal? Because that would be another consideration, is that this journal will publish papers of a certain quality. So you have to ensure or at least you want to save yourself a lot of time and effort by making sure that that your paper is essentially would kind of meet those quality standards. So you can, I would look at other papers in the journal and see that you're kind of in that range.
Yeah, and I think thinking about your readership too, or your audience, you know, if you are trying to reach state and provincial and federal fisheries managers, publishing in a more fundamental journal is less likely to be that direct pathway, as opposed to a management journal that is most likely, you know, on a shelf in their office or something that they might leaf through on a regular basis. So know your audience. Who are you trying to target? And as an individual, you don't necessarily have to have the same audience for every paper. You know, we can wear multiple hats as scientists, and well, this paper, this is who needs to see it. Therefore, I'm going to insert it into this community's conversations, and this one I'm going to put over here. There's some Barb has said some journals have online programs, or you can paste your abstract. It will suggest journals within that publisher to submit to. I think it's probably some of the bigger publishing houses that have that. And then I wanted to follow up. Anas has asked a question here. Some journals require reviewers to provide scores for different aspects of the manuscript. You know, maybe a 1 to 5 ranking for novelty, appropriateness of the stats, clarity of the writing, and so on, in addition to the detailed comments. How important are those scores? How does that come into that overall decision-making process? And we'll go to Jessica. And I know I'm involved with Margaret's journal, and we have to, every paper, we have to give a number between 0 and 100. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that. So Jess, we'll start with you, and then maybe we'll go to Margaret.
Thanks. this has been a discussion amongst all our editorial board in the past couple of years, because we have that with the Journal of Great Lakes Research, and we proposed to the associate editors potentially getting rid of it, and we found a real range of within the associate editors about whether they used it. So we kept it, but we have I would say half of the associate editors don't even look at it. Half of the associate or a quarter of the associate editors look at it a little bit, and then a quarter of the associate editors are really look at it. So I think it all sort of comes down to the individual associate editors, and so I don't really have any advice on how you deal with that, other than just, again, coming back to remember that everyone on each component here is a human and they work in different ways. So,
Margaret.
Yeah, so environmental biology of fishes, there isn't numerical rankings for each category. There's just that one that a lot of reviewers and advisory editors don't fill in, and that's fine. I don't really use that information. I mean, someone might say, reviewers and advisory editors might recommend major revisions and give it a 50. Somebody else might recommend major revisions and give it a 90. What matters, of course, is whether or not it's major revisions. So yeah, for one numerical ranking doesn't really provide any information that isn't already given in the review itself.
Okay.
So yeah, so I don't have any control over that, but I certainly wouldn't stress about what number you should give a manuscript if you're reviewing for environmental biology of fishes.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah, so CGFS also has that ranking system. I think it's relatively newly introduced, I think in the last year or two. And I look at it, but more important, I also look at the recommendations and the comments. And sometimes you see inconsistencies in terms of how review provided their comments versus how they the ranking the paper. And in that case, then I probably focus more on the actual review instead of rankings. So I think it's really important to just not based on one piece of information alone, and should have based on the review itself to make a decision. But that do give me kind of overall at the very beginning, at least overall picture about it, the quality, the potential quality of that paper. So
Great, thanks. I'm going to just point out in the chat here, Natalie has responded to Barb's earlier question about examples of a cover letter. Natalie works for CSP and they're going to see what they can find, but Natalie also pointed out there's a recent blog post that comes to mind that might be relevant there, so you can check that out. I'm going to go to a question from John. This one's close to my heart. Why are formatting requirements for manuscripts still so varied and onerous, particularly at the stage of first submission? Why not establish something like a standard in terms of citation format, capitalized common names, grammar, abstract, and so on? And so the idea here is that if a paper ends up getting rejected from one, could be a desk reject, or you then have to spend another 3 or 4 hours if you're like me and a dinosaur and don't use reference manager software, and you have to redo everything by hand and then send it off to the next to see if the same thing's gonna happen. So in many ways, this is a question probably more for the publishers than the editors and so on, but I think we all probably have our own perspectives here. So anybody want to weigh in here? Jessica, I saw your hand first, and then Margaret.
I probably shouldn't admit this, but the Journal of Great Lakes Research is not super strict when we first get our early submissions. The sort of formatting and author guide information is, we push it a little bit more near the end when we know that you're going to make it through. But on first submission, we're not super strict with those rules. Don't take a mile with that inch, though. Thank you.
Thank you for your candor, Margaret.
Yeah, I would say the same, and yes, that I suspect that we as editors have no control over standardizing the format, and I certainly, as editor-in-chief of Environmental Biology of Fishes, asked, okay, what things get taken care of automatically that we don't have to worry about, what things do authors have to worry about, and I was told it's all important. So I at least put together just a one-page, easy to read thing, and then just by process of observation, I saw, okay, well, the copy editors actually do that automatically, but they're notoriously bad at this, this, and this. And so then I would know what I would ask authors to focus on, because it's, yeah, because it's embarrassing if those errors are made. But like Jess said, that I don't stress about that on first submission. I'm not going to send something back and have somebody spend hours finessing all of the formatting, only to have it be reject without review because it doesn't fit the scope or something like that. If it's difficult for reviewers to read through, like I hate numbered references, for example, I find that's very difficult for the reviewer to read. And so I would at least ask for that to be done. Exactly how you do the fine formatting is a later matter. So it's like everything we do. We try to balance between what serves the author and what makes it easier for the reviewers, and what will result in a better final product.
Jewel.
Yeah, just to add there, I think one thing you might want to do is check the journal. One thing I'm noticing when I publish in various journals is that they're lifting those requirements. It's at least for the you have those formatting requirements, at least for the first submission. Like I think, and I think that's also a recognition by publishers that they too are competing for submissions, and so I would check the journal to see if they actually require you to fit that format on first submission. I think that ultimately they'll need you to format it for the journal in the final draft, but what I'm finding now is more of these journals are actually accepting submissions that don't exactly fit the journal format.
And I think they still have to be consistent. In other words, it can't look like a dog's reference of a reference list. All the references need to be there, and the key information needs to be there. Whether the commas are here or there, it doesn't matter a whole lot at that stage, but they still, just for our new folks, our ECR folks, it can't be disastrous. As a referee, we do need to be able to go look and see if the Jones, that Jones et al. Paper, I want to be able to find that and read it if I need to. And that needs to be the case for all folks. So it's not a matter of things being incomplete. It's just, are things italicized or not, or short form or not? That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about in terms of those details. Margaret?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is if it's obviously formatted for another journal, and the cover letter says, "Dear Sir," and it's obviously formatted for another journal, it makes me think Environmental Biology of Fishes wasn't your first choice, and that maybe you're just firing it out quickly to see if it'll stick someplace. It is nice to see that there has been some thought to choosing a journal in terms of the scope of the paper, rather than just casting your net widely.
Margaret, you are reminded me of a question that Tanya asked. I was looking for a place to insert it. Tanya asked whether or not when somebody is, so say you had your paper rejected from 1 or 3 different journals, is there any expectation that you tell that to subsequent journals when you submit your paper? So if Young and Jules both rejected my paper and I sent it to Environmental Biology of Fishes, am I obligated to tell you that it was previously rejected by CJ and Facets? Margaret?
I would say you're not obligated to. I probably myself wouldn't. I think that you would probably, it may bias a new editor against you. One thing I would do though is be very careful about taking advice. So if it was rejected after review and you got advice from reviewers, take some time to read through their comments and improve the manuscript, because it's not unusual that it might go back to the same reviewer. And I've certainly had at least half a dozen situations where a reviewer said, I've already reviewed this for another journal. I put hours into a review and they've completely disregarded all of my advice. Do you want me to review it still? And I would say no. I think you've already put your time in. So I wouldn't think that you have to declare that, but certainly use that as an opportunity to improve it before submitting elsewhere.
Thanks. Young, I think I saw your hand too.
Yeah, I think I just have a same answer to that, and I think it's sometimes, you know, it's okay, you don't tell us, but sometimes you know, they even didn't change the submission letter, so you can see that the journal that they actually submitted. So actually I can tell quite a few times actually. I detect myself, which I don't think it's good. So yeah. Yep.
All right, excellent. There's some interesting, more philosophical questions in the chat. I'm just going to keep them for a little bit later. I'm going to do a few more sort of process-oriented ones. Where's that line between novelty and the realization that we're in that we have a replication crisis in science? You know, something will be published and it's sort of taken as gospel that this is the way it is, yet 100 other studies repeat it and find that that's not the way the world works. Yet this is the one that gets the novelty credit, and all of these others are sort of shunted away because they're simply replicating what the other study did. So where's that line between novelty and the recognition that we have a replication crisis? Who'd like to tackle that one? Jules?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important point. We do have one of the things that we did when we started Facets was that we said we would allow replication studies, but we have as one of our acceptance criteria that you must make original contributions to knowledge. So we kind of skate that line a little bit, and I think that it's important to be able to articulate that if you are going to do replication studies, you still have to be able to show how you are advancing knowledge. And I think that there's a bit of a skill to that. That I think that even if you reproduce something that's been done before, you still have to be able to articulate how this is adding to the existing body of knowledge. So we ask our authors to skate that line a little bit when they do replication studies, but we do sort of recognize that there is a replication crisis and that we're doing what we can to address that.
Great. Thanks. Anybody else want to offer anything up there? I thought that was a nice summary of the issue. Cool. All right, I'm going to ask another one here. This wasn't on my list, but I saw on Twitter yesterday, some folks were asking about, maybe it was this morning, about positionality statements. And so we're seeing these often in the context of works with Indigenous peoples or communities or lands. And you know, they take various forms, but just wondering on, and they're still on the new side of things. I think Canadian science publishers has sort of been at the vanguard of this, being Canadian and obviously critical mass of Indigenous peoples in communities and in our pathway to reconciliation and so on. But interested in some conversation around that space. So are you starting to see more of these positionality statements, and any thoughts or guidance for folks? Jessica.
I don't have any real guidance, but we just had a special issue on bridging knowledge systems that is actually published this month in the journal Great Lakes Research, where I don't think I'd seen a positionality statement before this special issue, but the special issue itself was rife with them because there was a lot of research that was either led by Indigenous communities or co-developed with Indigenous communities, and this is an interesting issue because it was more difficult to move through the traditional academic structure that we have for the journal, while maintaining sort of that we are a research journal. So we're publishing research papers, but allowing some flexibility in there from our traditional formatting. And we did have a comment come back from a group review for one of the papers, where the reviewer had gone and discussed it in a circle within the Indigenous community to get the sort of group review to bring back. And they said that the positionality statement that was included in that paper was one of the key things that made them support that paper, because of how the positionality statement sort of prefaced the work and placed that work in the larger context. So I think that it's all context dependent, but in this case, it was a really critical part of that paper. And then it was nice to have a reviewer come back and tell us that this was specifically why we supported this paper so strongly.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great example just of the of your recent special issue. And most of the positionality statements I'm seeing are for that kind of community engaged science and scholarship, as opposed to something that might be, zooplankton morphology in under different day-night regimes, on a university campus. And it doesn't mean that in the future we might not see more positionality statements bringing in other perspectives beyond, one's linked to indigeneity and indigenous perspectives. So I think we're sort of at the precipice of more in this space. Anybody else seen anything that they'd like to share? Jewel?
Sure. Yeah, sure. This is an area that we are working in facets as well. So we encourage community engaged research, which involves, which means involving communities from the planning stages, and getting a sense also of their concerns and really sort of involving the community from the standpoint of even the research planning and the way that they formulate questions. So we've been involved in Indigenous knowledge and publishing papers in Indigenous knowledge systems. There was one paper in particular that came out in Facets recently that was it was entitled 10 Calls to Action for Truth and Reconciliation, scientists doing research in Indigenous lands. And so there was I really liked that the way that was formulated. It got people thinking about what scientists can and should be doing, especially when they're working with Indigenous communities. And so that would be a good read that I would recommend.
And I think it's fair to say that in the future you can expect an Aqua series webinar that involves Indigenous voices. So that's certainly something that we are thinking about. Cool. Okay, I'm going to move us along. How long is too long in peer review? Okay, you're a keen student. You submitted that paper 2 weeks ago. Is it time to start, phoning the editor-in-chief every day? What is reasonable to expect? And, what are the challenges that editors have in securing referees, acknowledging that that's really the driver of how long these things take? So, thoughts? Margaret?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that it's probably going to take at least a month before you get a review back. And I would say these days it's probably, maybe closer to a month and a half, 2 months, even though journals might give reviewers 3 weeks to submit a review. You can't expect reviews back in 3 weeks. It often takes time to find reviewers. Most of you have probably heard how challenging it is to get reviewers these days. Everybody is so busy. It really is challenging. And so it's not unusual to have, double digits of reviewers who decline the invitation or don't answer the invitation. So it can take quite a bit of time. And then when we do find reviewers who are willing to review a manuscript. If they need more than 3 weeks, we will give them more than 3 weeks. So I can certainly see if you've hit 2 months, politely inquiring on the status of the manuscript. I know if a manuscript has been held up for some time because we're having trouble getting reviews, I will contact the authors and ask them, would you like us to continue looking, or would you like the manuscript back so you can send it elsewhere? I try not to reject manuscripts without review just because I can't find reviewers. If I think it's a good manuscript for the journal otherwise, but I will give the authors the opportunity to have it back and try elsewhere if it's being held up for quite some time.
Thanks. Other folks, Jons.
Yeah, I think there are different steps here. So I think first of all, you have to go through the editor-in-chief and associate editor steps. And, that would decide whether your paper would be sent out for reviewer. So I think you can, everybody can look at their status online. And, once you pass the first step, and that probably take, depend on whether we can find a reviewer. So, varies from, month to even 3 or 4 months with the CGFS. But we really, for me, is, I look at kind of 3 month or kind of threshold. And the ones that's over 3 months, I don't know, that's what I have when I was a graduate student. My mentor told me that 3 months, but back then, they sent they mail the manuscript. So you don't review them online. It was old fashioned, they deliver it to your hands and then you review it and then send it back. But at 3 months is really a kind of threshold for me. I kind of look at it, see what happened with that paper. Sometimes you only can secure one review, which you have to make a decision based on one set of review, which sometimes is hard. And but sometimes I have to make a tough call here. As editor-in-chief, associate editor can approach me, say we only secure one review. Are we going to go ahead to make a decision for that just based on the one set? We did try to discourage of that, but sometimes we do have to make a decision. But I think if you haven't heard for 3 months, I think it's a time for you to get in touch with the journal editor's office, editorial office, just to inquire, what happened. And I think back then, I think we probably were not acted properly, just to respond to your inquiries.
Yep. And I'm pleased to say that a few years ago, we actually did some social science around this, and we surveyed authors, and 3 months was the time at which authors generally felt it appropriate to give a first nudge back to a journal to say, hey, just checking in to see how things are going, just hope you didn't forget about me. Authors can log in and also see where things are. If you're a month and a half in and it's still waiting for associate editor assignment, I might nudge that one. Whereas at 3 months, if it says, waiting for referee responses, you can't rush that. Referees have been selected. So you can kind of, the system will share some information with you. And you're also, I think it's frustrating when you're dealing with journals that aren't good at communicating. That's not the case with any of the journals or editors that we have here. But you see horror stories on Twitter about folks. I've been 6 months and I've sent 40 emails. I've had no responses. I don't know where my paper is. So that's not good editor or editorial office behavior, but that does happen. So yeah, somewhere in that 3 month range seems to be about, the first time. But as was said earlier, almost everybody in this system is a volunteer. And if you're a field ecologist and you're rushing to, for example, get your work all submitted before May 1st, and then you're wondering why your field ecology work isn't being reviewed quickly by your fellow field ecologists that are also in the field. So there's that kind of thing happens quite a bit, I think, in our world. And so there are reasons why it can be super, super complicated. So cool. All right. I'm going to move us to some slightly more philosophical space. And so Andrew asked a question about whether or not we see any fundamental limitations or flaws in the peer review process. And, you know, and if we do, what are those, and what can we do to change or fix or address those issues, whether they're biases or whatever they might be. So what are the imperfections with peer review? There are many. I'll layer on and say the first obvious one is that we're all human. So it's inherently a human endeavor, and we have imperfect knowledge, and we all bring biases to the table, and so on. So that's kind of like just, you know, acknowledging that we are human, and it is at this point still a human process. Yeah, thoughts? A stumper. What if I phrase it this? Okay, Margaret, you want to play?
Well, it's essentially just restating what you said. And yeah, it's not a perfect process. That the result of peer review isn't that we now all have perfect papers that are published. A lot of our work is very specialized. If the few people who really know the ins and outs of that system aren't available to review it, there may be some things that are missed. But we do our best. I know for my own papers as an author, they have all been immensely improved by the peer review process. Even when I have bristled when I first read the reviews, and I think all of the reviewers are, you know, they don't know anything, and then I calm down and I read through them, and they've all been improved. They still may not be perfect, but I think that, yeah, it's not a perfect system, but I think at least in my experience, it still works well.
Okay. What about, so Andrew suggested it was a dud question. It is not. It is a tough one. And it's one that we don't like to talk about, right? Because you know, we don't want to cast more doubt on science in a world where there's already people doubting science. So to what extent has sort of the move towards open science and the expectation that data sets are posted online and code is posted online, to what extent is that feeding into improving the peer review process? Any thoughts on that? Jess, and then Yang?
I think that it's improving it. I think that one of the fundamental issues we have here is that the push to publish as many things and produce as many things as you can means that no one has time to read all the things that are out there. So even if we have, I mean, having the open data and the code out there, it's helping, but there's only so many hours in the day for people to look at things. I think that at least we have this fallback that people can publish corrigiums after to correct things if they find it, but that's going with the understanding that that there might be flaws in science that are missed by reviewers, but they were accidental flaws, not flaws that someone was trying to hide.
Right. Okay, Yang?
I think it's also depend on the study area. And, you know, myself, by training, I'm a fishery stock assessment scientist. And sometimes, you know, I think a DFO probably has that kind of process, you know, to provide the best available science to advise fisheries management. And one of the criteria probably would be just, you know, use whatever information from the published paper, which has been peer reviewed. But sometimes I have to highlight that, you know, this is not a peer review process for stock assessment. And, you know, we are the reviewers, so we're not a server, stock assessment reviewers here. And so you cannot, you know, DFO still should have a stock assessment review process before they can use the information derived from the study, you know, to inform fisheries management. And so that's, I think it really, you know, if you provide you know, data, provide a source code, provide everything, definitely helpful. But I doubt actually, you know, the review is going to actually run the model and actually going to test it, look at all the numbers, and I think that's impossible. So I think it really depends on the areas. I think some papers are probably, if you fall into someone who is doing very similar work, they probably are willing to spend more time on the manuscript and look at the detail about the methodology. They probably give you more insightful comments. Some may not. So again, I think it's depend on reviewers, study areas and their paper too. So.
All right, I'm gonna wrap it up with one last question, and it's a messy one here. So AI, artificial intelligence. It is, those of us that are educators, sort of shaking up how we do things in the classroom. And as editors, we're now starting to, and publishers are starting to have to think about this too. So there have now been papers published with ChatGPT as co-authors. I have certainly seen an uptick of nonsense coming my way that clearly has not been written by, a human. There's nothing lucid about it. Yet it also could provide opportunities to, so both to enhance peer review, enhance writing. So where's the line, and where are each of you at with your respective journals and publishers in dealing with this emerging AI landscape? And I know it's early days, so I'm going to start with the order in which you were introduced. So Jules, you get to go first.
Okay. So yeah, I think that AI sort of represents both opportunities and threats. I think that it's a new tool that I think, if used well, can enhance, but it can also be abused. And so, I think that there are some, I think that people are using it, will continue to use it, and I think that it can in some cases, if it's heavily edited, it can improve writing. It can improve our ability to find sources of information or find things that we might not have found quite so easily. I think that there are also tools to help us deal with some of these issues. For example, I've come across this one tool called GPT-0, which is a way to, if you wanted to add text into, you can take text and see if it was likely generated by AI. So there are some things that you can do to track AI. But I think that AI will emerge as one of those things, that it's a new tool that that we can still it's very new, and I think we're all kind of struggling to come to terms with it at this particular moment. I think that if you ask us in a year or two, we'll have a little more experience with it. But ChatGPT is a relatively new thing, so we're all struggling with it. But we're being optimistic.
I foresee a workshop in the future that SCAS could organize about AI and what our community needs to know. Thanks, Jules, for starting us off. That was quite a comprehensive answer, so folks are welcome to add on more or just nod awkwardly. Jess, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I think I don't have a whole lot to add. I think it's just something that's sort of looming in the wings. We at our journal have not been thinking about it very much yet, but as Jules said, it could be a good tool because there's nothing more intimidating than a blank page. So could get you started, but I don't really know much. It'd be interesting to learn about it as we go forward.
Great, thanks, Jan.
I think agree. I think AI kind of pose both challenge and opportunity for us. And right now, I think it's a really, we need to work together to develop some kind of guidelines. And maybe, I just think maybe, SCAS and CSP can work together, have some kind of working group, to put together some guidelines and to, guide how actually people can use those AI to edit publishing papers or reports, And I think some kind of working group, because it just started. So it's a relatively new to a lot of people. And I think if we can take a lead on that, I think that would be great, because you don't see some journals have some guidelines. I saw a few journals have some guidelines, but they're very preliminary. I think it's lack of a depth, just a very general guideline. And so I think for us, it's a good opportunity to take a lead in the world. So,
thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, certainly not something I've had much experience with. I mean, in terms of opportunities, that there are a lot of international authors submitting to environmental biology of fishes. And so if this helps make writing in English easier, then that I think would be a fabulous opportunity. I think some of the manuscripts I've seen recently maybe have been AI generated, because there, as you said, that uptick of nonsense. All I have done, whether it's AI or just someone submitting a very early draft or something that just isn't a good fit with the scope, maybe the only thing I've done at this point is spent a little less time personalizing the rejection letter, because I'm not sure if I'm responding to who I'm responding to even, and there have been a few that have just been, I think, 5 different variations on the same thing, and so those may have been a reject, do not transfer a decision, but not something that I've had to deal with, I don't think, on a day-to-day basis yet.
Yeah, and who knows where we're going to be in 10 years? Will we be using AI in our reviews? Will the editor be replaced by a computer interface? Will we use peer reviewers in the same way? So that is for the future. That is a discussion. I don't care to go there today, but there's a lot happening, and it's happening awfully quickly. And so I think, as you've heard here, we're all sort of just, heads are spinning a little bit. We're trying to sort it out in the classroom, but also sort it out in terms of the editorial space. So with that, we are nearing the end of our time together. And so a couple things. First of all, if you have ideas for future webinars or any ideas for SCAS or want to get involved, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email me, you can email via the SCAS email that we shared earlier, or you can throw something in the chat. I've got a few ideas just from the questions and comments folks have had already. I'd like to thank the panelists for their time. Margaret, Jessica, Young, and Jules, really appreciate you, as well as some other folks that were involved behind the scenes. We have an SCAS webinar committee chaired by Christine Madliger, and she was unable to join us today, unfortunately. I'd also like to thank Natalie and Hillary at Canadian Science Publishers, who really helped us get the word out and supported us in the chat here. And they'll also be producing a summary of some key take-homes from this that we'll circulate around. And a big thanks for our 2 bouncers, Cole and Megan. I don't think I saw any bad behavior, so it looks like it was a quiet hour and a half for you. Nonetheless, thank you. And a huge thanks to participants. If it's just the 5 of us having a conversation, it's not nearly as rich with good questions coming from the chat. So thanks to all of you for taking time to engage with us. We really appreciate you. And with that, I will draw our session to a close and hope to see all of you at some point soon, perhaps at a future webinar or at the SCAS annual meeting in Fredericton. Thanks. Take care, folks.